The summer morning was sticky and alive with the hum of the city as Leah Carter adjusted her freshly pressed uniform in the cracked mirror of her aging apartment. The badge pinned neatly to her chest reflected the morning light streaming through the window. A symbol of accomplishment that she had worked tirelessly for. Today marked her first day patrolling solo as an officer with the Metropolitan Police Department. Her pulse raced, a mix of excitement and nerves tightening her throat. Today's the day, she whispered to herself, flashing a practiced smile in the mirror. She grabbed her utility belt, holstered her radio, and stepped out the door, ready to prove she belonged. The precinct parking lot buzzed with life as Leah pulled in. Officers milled about, some chatting near squad cars, others gulping down last-minute sips of coffee. Sergeant Ray Thompson, a veteran officer with salt and pepper hair and a weathered face that carried decades of experience, stood near the entrance, scanning the bustling lot. When he caught sight of Leah, he approached with deliberate steps. "Carter," he called out, his voice steady and authoritative. "Got a minute?" Leah's stomach clenched, but she plastered on her confident smile. "Of course, Sergeant." Thompson led her to a quiet corner near the break room. "Look, I know you are eager," he began, his tone measured, "but I need you to remember something. This isn't about showing how tough you are. Policing isn't just about authority. It's about understanding the people you serve. The city is complicated. Don't rush to judge what you see out there." Leah bristled inwardly. She'd spent years preparing for this moment, graduating top of her class and enduring grueling field training. Now, on her first day solo, she wasn't about to let caution temper her ambition. "With all due respect, Sergeant," she replied, "I think I've got this." Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Fair enough. Just remember, it's not about you out there. It's about them." The briefing room buzzed with the usual pre-shift energy, officers trading stories, rookies exchanging notes, and veterans claiming their usual seats. Leah took a spot in the front row, notebook open more for appearances than necessity. She'd memorized every protocol, every procedure. When Lieutenant Chen, a no-nonsense woman with a sharp gaze, began the morning updates, Leah felt a surge of anticipation. "Judge Marcus Reynolds is presiding over several cases this month," Chen said, her tone turning serious. "You've all heard of him. The man they call the Scale. Justice isn't just blind in his courtroom, it's inevitable. Everything by the book. No shortcuts. No assumptions. Keep your reports pristine. People." The name rang a faint bell for Leah, but she dismissed the thought. A judge was a judge. Her job was to enforce the law, his was to interpret it. Assignments were handed out, and Leah's patrol route included a mix of residential and commercial areas known for their cultural diversity and occasional challenges. To her, it was the perfect stage to shine. By mid-morning, Leah had issued 3 traffic citations, responded to a minor shoplifting incident, and diffused a tense argument between neighbors. Each interaction bolstered her confidence. She was good at this. Or so she thought. Then came the call. Possible disturbance at Marshall Street and 4th. Male subject acting suspiciously near a convenience store. Crackled the dispatcher's voice through her radio. Leah responded instantly. Unit 245 en route. The scene seemed deceptively ordinary. A young black man stood near the convenience store entrance, scrolling through his phone. He was dressed in business casual attire, a leather satchel slung over his shoulder. Leah pulled up and stepped out, her posture radiating authority as she approached him. "Sir, step away from the entrance," she called out, her tone firm. The man looked up, startled. "Excuse me? We received reports of suspicious activity. What's your business here?" I'm waiting for my sister. He replied evenly. She works at the dental office next door. We're meeting for lunch. The explanation was reasonable, but Leah's training whispered otherwise. Something about his calm demeanor unsettled her. Compliance, she'd been taught, meant nervous deference. She ignored the doubt creeping into her mind. I need to see some ID, she said, her voice sharper now. May I ask why? He countered, still polite but firm. I'm just standing here. Leah's hand hovered near her utility belt. Are you refusing to comply with a lawful order? The tension in her voice drew the attention of passers-by. Some began recording on their phones. The man, now identified as Darnell Washington, slowly reached for his wallet, narrating his movements clearly. But Leah's training took over. In her mind, she saw what she'd been conditioned to expect, a threat. Moments later, Darnell was in handcuffs, charged with resisting arrest. His sister emerged from the dental office just in time to see him being placed in the back of Leah's patrol car. Her lunch break transformed into a nightmare. Back at the precinct, Leah filed her report with practiced ease, painting Darnell as defiant and uncooperative. As she recounted the incident in the break room, her colleagues exchanged uneasy glances. Had to show him how we handle things in the city, she boasted, oblivious to the weight of their silence. Across town, Darnell's mother, Patricia Washington, sat in the modest office of Marcus Hayes, a civil rights attorney. She clutched her purse tightly, her voice trembling with restrained emotion as she described the call she'd received from her daughter. My son has never been in trouble, Patricia insisted. He's an accountant. For God's sake. He was just waiting for his sister. Hayes nodded, his face grim as he scanned the preliminary report and witness statements. The arresting officer's name is Leah Carter. He noted, rookie, first solo patrol. That might help us, especially since this case is assigned to Judge Reynolds' courtroom. In his chambers, Judge Marcus Reynolds reviewed Darnell Washington's file with methodical precision. Decades of experience allowed him to spot the inconsistencies in Leah's report almost immediately. The language was too polished, too rehearsed, and the body cam footage, if it existed, would likely tell a different story. Maggie, he called to his clerk. Pull Officer Carter's training records and any available footage from the incident. This one needs a closer look. The stage was set. In the days that followed, Leah's carefully constructed narrative would unravel, and the ideals she had clung to would be put to the ultimate test in Judge Reynolds' courtroom, a place where justice wasn't blind but inevitable. Leah Carter arrived at Judge Marcus Reynolds' courtroom Monday morning, her polished uniform crisp, her badge gleaming under the courthouse lights. She climbed the marble steps with a confidence she didn't entirely feel, determined to prove her actions justified. The courtroom was already bustling. Spectators, reporters, and legal professionals filled the gallery, their whispers and stares making the air heavy with tension. The name Reynolds carried weight in the city. He was known for unflinching scrutiny and an iron resolve to root out injustice. As she stepped inside, Leah caught sight of Sergeant Ray Thompson seated near the back, his expression unreadable. He nodded briefly in acknowledgement, but it wasn't the encouraging gesture she'd hoped for. Instead, it felt like a warning. The Washington family sat near the front, their presence a stark reminder of the stakes. Darnell looked calm, his demeanor composed, but Leah noticed his mother, Patricia, clutching a handkerchief tightly, her face a mask of worry. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Reynolds entered, his black robe flowing around him as he took his seat at the bench. The room fell silent under his gaze. We're here today regarding the arrest of Mr. Darnell Washington, Reynolds began, his voice deep and steady. This court will determine whether Officer Leah Carter acted within the bounds of the law during this encounter. Both the integrity of the arrest and the conduct of the Metropolitan Police Department will be scrutinized. Leah swallowed hard. The weight of Reynolds' words felt like a physical force pressing against her chest. This wasn't just about her actions, it was about the system she represented. The city attorney, Michael Keene, began by presenting Leah's written report. Keene was seasoned and confident. But even his polished arguments faltered under the scrutiny of Marcus Hayes, Donnell's defense attorney. Hayes dissected every line of Leah's report with precision, pointing out inconsistencies and phrases that seemed deliberately crafted to paint Donnell as a threat. "Officer Carter," Hayes said as he turned to Leah, "your report states that Mr. Washington exhibited suspicious behavior that warranted investigation. Can you describe exactly what that behavior was?" Leah sat straighter, her voice steady. He was standing near the entrance of the store, lingering without entering. "In my experience, that kind of behavior can be indicative of someone scoping out a location." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Lingering. Did he do anything else? Speak to anyone? Enter the store?" "No, sir. He was simply standing there." Hayes nodded and approached the courtroom's large screen. "Your Honor, the defense submits Exhibit B, Officer Carter's body cam footage." A murmur spread through the gallery as the footage began to play. The video, captured from Leah's perspective, showed her approach Donnell with her hand resting on her belt, her voice clipped and authoritative. The court watched as Donnell politely explained he was waiting for his sister and clearly stated he was reaching for his ID. There was no sudden movement, no aggression, only Leah's escalating tone and the visible tension she injected into the interaction. As the footage ended, the room sat in stunned silence. Hayes broke it. "Your Honor, the video speaks for itself." Mr. Washington complied fully, and the escalation came solely from Officer Carter. Keene attempted to interject. "Your Honor, context matters." "Mr. Keene," Reynolds interrupted, his voice sharp, "this court has reviewed the footage. Context indeed matters, and so do the actions of the officer in the field. Let's proceed." Leah felt her composure slipping. The doubt she'd ignored since the arrest now loomed large. What had seemed like a justified action at the moment now appeared rash, even reckless. During a recess, Leah paced the courthouse hallway, avoiding the curious gazes of onlookers. Thompson approached her, his usual calm demeanor giving way to concern. "Carter," he said quietly, "you need to be honest with yourself. Did you really see a threat? Or did you react to an assumption?" Leah stiffened. "I followed protocol." Thompson sighed. "Sometimes, protocol isn't enough. The system isn't perfect, and it's on us to recognize when it's failing." Before she could respond, Hayes and Patricia Washington excited the courtroom, their conversation audible as they passed. "They're digging into her training records," Hayes said. "If there's a pattern of behavior, we'll find it." Leah's stomach dropped. She thought back to her time at the academy and her early training sessions. The lessons on maintaining authority and projecting control had seemed standard at the time. But now they felt more like indoctrination. Was she trained to see threats where none existed? The afternoon session brought a new witness, Sergeant Thompson. As he took the stand, Leah's unease grew. He'd always been supportive during her training, but his testimony might reveal uncomfortable truths. "Sergeant Thompson," Hayes began, "you supervised Officer Carter during her training period. What can you tell us about her performance?" Thompson's gaze was steady. Carter was diligent and eager to learn. She followed instructions well and performed admirably in technical aspects of the job. "And what about her interactions with civilians?" Thompson hesitated, then continued. There were instances where I noticed she approached situations with preconceived notions. It's something I addressed in my evaluations. Hayes leaned forward. Preconceived notions. Can you elaborate? There were a few incidents where her assumptions about individuals' intent or character seemed to guide her actions more than the actual circumstances. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Leah felt a flush of anger and embarrassment rise in her chest. Thompson had never expressed such concerns directly to her. As Thompson stepped down, Hayes introduced another piece of evidence, a call log from the day of Darnell's arrest. The call reporting suspicious activity had originated from an untraceable payphone. There were no other witnesses who corroborated Leah's claims of a disturbance. Your Honor, Hayes concluded, this arrest was not based on reasonable suspicion but on an unfounded assumption that escalated needlessly. Officer Carter's actions reflect a larger issue within the department, a culture that prioritizes authority over accountability. By the end of the day, Leah felt the weight of her actions fully pressing down on her. As she left the courtroom, a group of reporters crowded around, their questions sharp and relentless. Officer Carter, do you have any comment on the body cam footage? Do you believe your training influenced your actions? Is the department responsible for fostering this behavior? She pushed past them, her confidence from the morning reduced to a fragile shell. The path ahead was no longer clear. Questions swirled in her mind. Doubts she couldn't shake. Was she truly upholding justice? Or had she become a pawn in a flawed system? Meanwhile, in Judge Reynolds' chambers, his clerk delivered a sealed file. It's from Internal Affairs, she said quietly. It's about Carter's training program. Reynolds opened the file, his expression hardening as he read. Looks like we have more to uncover than we thought. He murmured. The next session would bring more revelations. Not just about Leah Carter, but about the system that had shaped her, and the consequences of ignoring its flaws. The storm was just beginning to gather. Leah Carter spent the night staring at her ceiling, her mind replaying every moment of her encounter with Darnell Washington. The courtroom revelations had begun to erode her confidence. But the whispers she'd overheard about internal investigations into her training records struck an even deeper nerve. Her heart sank as she thought back to her first days at the academy. The camaraderie among recruits, the mentors she'd trusted, and the lessons she'd absorbed without question. Sleep refused to come, and by dawn, Leah was at her kitchen table, staring at a half-empty mug of coffee. The knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Sergeant Thompson standing on her porch, his face etched with concern. Carter, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. We need to talk. Thompson sat across from her, his gaze heavy but not unkind. You are in deep, Leah, deeper than you realize. Leah bristled. I followed the training. I did what I was taught. And that's the problem, Thompson countered. What you were taught wasn't always right. The academy pushes authority as the answer to everything. But authority without judgment is dangerous. And now, it's catching up to all of us. Leah frowned. What are you talking about? Thompson hesitated, then pulled out a folder from his bag. This is a report I filed years ago about Officer Randall Green, one of the officers who trained you. It went nowhere, like most complaints against him. Leah flipped through the documents, her pulse quickening. The report detailed patterns of excessive force, manipulated evidence, and biased arrests, all brushed aside as necessary tactics. Green's name had been legendary at the academy, a tough-as-nails officer who got results. Now, those results looked more like a string of unchecked abuses. This can't be real, Leah whispered, though deep down, she wasn't surprised. Green had been one of her first field training officers. She remembered his harsh words during their first patrol. People will only respect you if they fear you. It's real, Thompson said. And he wasn't the only one. There's a culture in the department that rewards this behavior. And you got swept up in it. But now it's time to make a choice. You can keep digging in your heels. Or you can help expose the truth. Leah's hands trembled as she closed the folder. She wasn't ready to admit she'd been wrong. But doubt had taken root. And it was growing fast. Back at the courthouse, the second day of testimony began with a bombshell. Judge Reynolds, his tone grave, announced that new evidence had surfaced implicating multiple officers in patterns of misconduct. Internal Affairs had uncovered a troubling connection between Leah's training program and a broader network of officers engaged in systemic corruption. Marcus Hayes wasted no time capitalizing on the revelation. He called Detective Sarah Klein, an Internal Affairs investigator, to the stand. Klein, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, presented a series of damning documents and recordings. The evidence shows, Klein testified, that Officer Carter's training cohort was part of an unofficial mentorship program led by senior officers with histories of civilian complaints. These officers, including Randall Green, instilled a culture of aggression and encouraged recruits to prioritize arrests over community engagement. Hayes leaned forward. Detective Klein, did Officer Carter participate in this mentorship program? Yes, Klein confirmed. Her name appears in several reports as a promising recruit. She was paired with Green for her field training, during which many of these questionable practices were reinforced. Leah's stomach churned. The gallery erupted in murmurs. And Judge Reynolds called for order. Leah avoided Darnell Washington's gaze, ashamed to see the vindication in his eyes. As the day wore on, the courtroom became a battlefield. The city attorney, Michael Keene, scrambled to defend the department, arguing that Leah's actions were isolated and not indicative of a systemic issue. But Hayes methodically dismantled this narrative, introducing testimony from other civilians who had experienced similar treatment during their arrests. One witness, a young woman named Maya Johnson, described being stopped by Randall Green and Leah during a routine traffic check. I was scared, Maya said, her voice shaking. They treated me like I was a criminal from the start, even though all I did was forget to signal a lane change. Officer Green kept escalating, and Officer Carter just stood there, like she was watching and learning. Leah remembered the incident vividly. At the time, she'd convinced herself Maya's fear was a sign of guilt. Now, she saw it for what it was, the reaction of an innocent person caught in a web of intimidation. When Leah was called to the stand, the weight of her choices bore down on her. Hayes wasted no time pressing her. Officer Carter, do you believe Mr. Washington posed a genuine threat during your encounter? Leah hesitated. At the time, I believed he might. And now? The courtroom held its breath. Leah's voice wavered. Now, I think I overreacted. Overreacted, Hayes repeated. Or acted based on a bias instilled during your training? Leah couldn't meet his gaze. I don't know. During a recess, Leah found herself alone in the courthouse hallway. Her thoughts a swirling storm. She felt a presence behind her and turned to see Darnell Washington standing a few feet away. Can we talk? He asked. Leah nodded, her throat dry. They stepped into a quiet corner. And for a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Darnell broke the silence. Why did you do it? He asked. Why did you assume the worst about me? Leah struggled to find the words. It wasn't personal. It's what I was taught, to be vigilant. To see threats before they happen. Darnell shook his head. You weren't seeing me. You were seeing what they taught you to see. His words hit harder than any courtroom accusation. Leah felt the sting of tears but blinked them back. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't realize. I didn't question." "That's the problem," Darnell said. "No one questions. And people like me pay the price." As the session resumed, Judge Reynolds addressed the court. "The evidence presented thus far suggests a deeper issue within the Metropolitan Police Department. This case is no longer just about the arrest of Mr. Washington. It's about examining the systems that allow these patterns to persist." Reynolds ordered an immediate review of all cases involving Randall Green and his mentees, including Leah. He also summoned the department's internal affairs chief to testify in the coming days, ensuring the investigation would extend far beyond this courtroom. For Leah, the cracks in her foundation had turned into a chasm. She'd joined the force to make a difference. But now she was forced to confront the reality that she had become part of the problem. The question was no longer whether she had acted wrongly, but whether she had the courage to help set things right. As the day ended, Leah sat in her car, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The confident rookie who had stepped into the precinct months ago was gone. In her place was someone grappling with the enormity of her mistakes and the weight of the system she had once trusted. Her phone buzzed. It was Sergeant Thompson. "Meet me at the diner." His text read, "There's more you need to know." Leah started the engine, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil within. The road ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear: the truth was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. And it was only just beginning to unfold. The diner was nearly empty when Leah Carter arrived, the neon, open, sign flickering faintly in the window. Sergeant Thompson sat in a corner booth, a mug of coffee steaming in front of him. He looked up as Leah slid into the seat across from him, his face a mix of weariness and resolve. "I'm glad you came," he said. "We've got a lot to talk about." Leah's stomach churned. "Why do I feel like this is about more than just my case?" Thompson leaned forward, his voice low. "Because it is. What's happening to you, Carter, isn't an isolated incident. It's part of something bigger. Something that's been festering in the department for years." Thompson pulled a manila envelope from his bag and spread its contents on the table. "Documents, photographs, and a flash drive. This," he said, gesturing to the evidence, "is everything I've been able to gather over the past decade. Complaints that were buried, body cam footage that mysteriously disappeared, officers who were protected no matter how many lines they crossed." Leah picked up a photograph of Randall Green standing with a group of officers she recognized from her academy days. "Green's at the center of this, isn't he?" she asked. Thompson nodded. "He's not just a bad apple. He's part of a network, a shadow system within the department. They recruit officers like you, young and eager, and mold them into enforcers of their own brand of justice. And it doesn't stop there." "What do you mean?" Thompson hesitated, then slid her a copy of an email chain. "These are communications between Green and a company called Blue Line Solutions. It's a private firm run by former cops. And they've been providing training materials to departments across the state." Leah scanned the emails, her anger mounting. "These materials, they're teaching us how to manipulate evidence, aren't they?" "Not just that," Thompson said. "They're creating a playbook for how to control narratives, discredit civilians, and insulate officers from accountability. It's corruption on a scale most people can't imagine." Leah leaned back in her seat, her mind reeling. Why hasn't anyone stopped them? "They're careful," Thompson said. "They make it look like business as usual. And when someone gets too close, they shut it down. That's why I need your help." Leah stared at Thompson, disbelief mingling with frustration. "My help?" I'm barely holding on as it is. Do you realize what this investigation is doing to me? I do, Thompson said softly, but you're in a unique position. You've seen both sides of this system, the good and the bad. And if you step up now, you can help expose the truth. Leah looked away, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She thought about Donnell Washington, about Meyer Johnson, about every person whose life had been upended by the system she'd trusted. Finally, she sighed. What do you need me to do? Thompson smiled faintly. First, we're going to take this evidence to Judge Reynolds. He's already digging into the department. But with what we have here, he can go deeper. Then, you are going to testify, not just about your actions, but about everything you've seen and learned. The thought made Leah's stomach churn. They'll destroy me, she said. The department, Green, all of them, they'll make sure I never work in law enforcement again. Maybe, Thompson said, but think about why you became a cop in the first place. Was it to protect your career or to protect people? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Leah nodded slowly. Let's do it. The next morning, Leah and Thompson arrived at the courthouse. The manila envelope clutched tightly in Thompson's hands. Judge Marcus Reynolds met them in his chambers, his sharp eyes narrowing as he examined the evidence. This is damning, he said after a long silence. If what you are presenting is true, it's not just about one corrupt officer or even one department. This could implicate law enforcement agencies across the state. Thompson nodded. That's the point, Your Honor. We're dealing with a network that's built itself into the system. And if we don't act now, they'll keep growing. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. This won't be easy. Exposing something like this will rattle cages at every level. Are you prepared for the fallout? Leah's voice was quiet but steady. I am. Reynolds studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, I'll authorize a special inquiry into this network. But I'll need more than just this. I'll need testimony, cooperation, and evidence that can stand up in court. You'll have it, Thompson said. Reynolds glanced at the clock. Let's get started. The longer we wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks. Reynolds wasted no time. That afternoon, he convened a closed-door session with federal investigators, presenting the evidence Leah and Thompson had brought. Within hours, subpoenas were issued, and the first raids were planned. Meanwhile, word of the investigation began to spread. The atmosphere at the Metropolitan Police Department grew tense as whispers of internal affairs and federal oversight circulated through the halls. Leah felt the stares of her colleagues, the unspoken accusations hanging in the air. But she also saw something else, fear. That fear exploded into anger when the first raid occurred. Federal agents stormed the department's records office, seizing computers, documents, and servers. Randall Green was among the first to be called in for questioning, his smug confidence finally showing cracks. They're coming for us, he muttered to a group of officers as he exited the interrogation room. You'd better watch your backs. Leah heard the words and shivered. She knew Green wasn't just talking about the feds. That evening, as Leah returned to her apartment, she noticed a black SUV idling at the end of her street. Her heart raced as she approached her door, her hand hovering over her sidearm. Once inside, she double-checked the locks and peeked through the curtains. The SUV was still there, its engine idling quietly. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Thompson. Stay vigilant. They won't go down without a fight. Leah barely slept that night, her mind replaying every interaction she'd had with Green and his allies. She'd always felt there was an unspoken code among certain officers, a sense that they operated by rules different from the rest. Now, She realized just how deep that code went, and how dangerous it could be. The next day, as Leah prepared to head to the courthouse, her phone rang. It was Marcus Hayes. "Leah," he said, his voice urgent. "We've just received a tip, something big. Can you meet me at the courthouse immediately?" "What is it?" she asked. "Evidence," he said. "Footage that ties Green directly to one of the cases under review. But it's coming from someone inside the department." Leah's pulse quickened. "Who?" There was a pause on the line. "They're staying anonymous for now. But whoever it is, they're risking everything to help us." Leah grabbed her things and headed out the door. The stakes had just been raised, and she knew the fight for justice was far from over. The courthouse buzzed with an electric tension as Leah Carter stepped through its heavy wooden doors. Reporters lingered outside, their cameras flashing as key players entered the building. Inside, the air felt charged, the whispers and hurried footsteps of legal aides hinting at the storm brewing within. Marcus Hayes was waiting for Leah in a private conference room, a laptop open in front of him. He looked up as she entered, his face grave. "We've got it," he said. "The footage." Leah sat across from him, her throat dry. "What's on it?" Hayes turned the laptop toward her. "Everything we need to prove Green's role in the network, and more." The footage, captured by a whistleblower within the department, showed Randall Green at a training session. The room was filled with young recruits, including Leah herself. Seated at the back, Green stood at the front, a projector casting slides onto the wall behind him. "This," Green said in the video, gesturing to a flowchart, "is how we control the narrative. If a civilian gets mouthy, you document aggressive behavior. If they question you, it's non-compliance. And if they make any sudden movement, well," he smirked, "that's threatening behavior. Your report writes itself." The recruits shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Leah's younger self was visible in the frame, her face a mixture of confusion and hesitation. Green continued, "The key is confidence. If you believe your story, so will everyone else. The badge is your authority. Don't let anyone question it." Leah looked away from the screen, bile rising in her throat. She remembered that day vividly now. At the time, she'd rationalized Green's words as part of the job, a necessary toughness to survive in law enforcement. But now, they felt like poison. Hayes closed the laptop. "This footage doesn't just implicate Green. It's a blueprint for how the network operated. They weren't just training officers, they were indoctrinating them." Judge Marcus Reynolds called an emergency session to present the new evidence. The courtroom was packed, the gallery filled with journalists, activists, and civilians who had been following the case closely. As the footage played on the large courtroom screen, gasps echoed through the room. The image of Randall Green casually instructing officers on how to manipulate their authority sent shock waves through the audience. Leah felt their eyes on her, a mix of judgment and pity that made her skin crawl. When the footage ended, Judge Reynolds leaned forward, his hands steepled. "This court has seen enough to proceed with criminal charges against Randall Green and other implicated officers. Furthermore, we will broaden the scope of this inquiry to include all training programs connected to Blue Line Solutions." The gallery erupted into murmurs, but Reynolds raised a hand for silence. "This is not the end of our work, it is only the beginning. Justice requires persistence, and this court is committed to uncovering the full extent of this corruption." Leah let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The battle wasn't over, but they had landed a decisive blow. Later that evening, Leah returned to her apartment, exhausted but relieved. As she unlocked her door, a voice behind her made her freeze. "You think this is over?" She turned to see Randall Green leaning against the wall. His arms crossed, his expression cold. The smug confidence that had once defined him was gone, replaced by something darker. Leah's hand instinctively went to her phone. "What are you doing here?" Green stepped closer, his voice low. "You've made a lot of enemies, Carter. You think these people you're helping are going to protect you when this all blows up? You're disposable to them, just another pawn." Leah stood her ground, her heart pounding. "You don't scare me, Green. Your time is up." Green chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You're naive if you think this ends with me. The network is bigger than you know, and they won't let you tear it down. Watch your back, Carter." Before she could respond, Green turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Leah locked her door behind her, every nerve on edge. She knew Green wasn't bluffing. The network was larger than she'd imagined, and its reach extended far beyond her precinct. The trial of Randall Green began 2 months later, with Leah as a key witness. The courtroom was a crucible, the weight of years of corruption pressing down on every person present. Green's defense team tried to paint him as a scapegoat, arguing that his actions were part of a flawed but well-meaning system. But Leah's testimony cut through their narrative. She described her experiences with raw honesty, detailing how Green's mentorship had shaped her perspective and fueled her mistakes. She didn't hold back about her own culpability, acknowledging the harm she'd caused and the lives she'd disrupted. "I believed I was doing the right thing," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. But belief isn't enough when it's built on a foundation of lies. What Green taught us wasn't policing, it was control. And it's cost too many people too much. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Green was found guilty on multiple counts, including conspiracy, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations. As he was led away in handcuffs, he shot Leah a final glare, but she refused to look away. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of peace. The fallout from the trial was seismic. Departments across the state launched internal reviews, and dozens of officers were suspended or dismissed. Blue Line Solutions was shut down, its executives facing their own legal battles. Judge Reynolds issued a sweeping mandate for reform, calling for independent oversight of training programs and stricter accountability measures. The changes were slow and met with resistance, but they marked the beginning of a new chapter for law enforcement in the city. Leah, meanwhile, began working with community groups and reform advocates, sharing her story to help prevent others from falling into the same traps. She spoke at academies, warning recruits about the dangers of blind authority and the importance of empathy and accountability. One day, after a speaking engagement, Darnell Washington approached her. His demeanor was calm, but his words were pointed. "It's not about fixing the system for people like me, Carter. It's about fixing it for everyone." Leah nodded. "I know, and I'm not stopping until it's done." Years later, Leah Carter's name became synonymous with change. Her journey from a rookie blinded by ambition to a reform advocate was held up as an example of how even the most broken systems could be mended. But for Leah, it was never about recognition. It was about redemption. And as she stood on the courthouse steps one rainy afternoon, watching a new class of recruits enter the building, she allowed herself a small smile. The work wasn't finished, justice never truly was. But for the first time, she believed they were on the right path. As we reflect on Leah Carter's journey, we're reminded of a truth that resonates deeply: life is really black and white. Her story, like so many of ours, is filled with moments of certainty shattered by hard-earned wisdom. It invites us to take a step back and consider the principles that guide our own choices and actions. Here are a few lessons we can carry forward. It's natural to trust the systems we grow up in. Whether it's our workplaces, schools, or even societal norms. But as Lear learned, blind faith in authority can lead us astray. Real strength lies in questioning, in seeking truth, and in standing up when something feels wrong. By holding systems accountable, we create space for justice and equity to thrive. We all bring our own experiences and biases into every interaction, often without realizing it. Lear's initial failure was rooted in assumptions about others, about her role, and about what it meant to protect. True progress begins when we replace judgment with understanding and take the time to see people as individuals, not just stereotypes or statistics. Mistakes are inevitable. What defines us is how we respond to them. Lear's transformation from a rigid officer to a voice for reform shows us that redemption isn't about erasing the past, it's about learning from it. Each of us has the capacity to grow, to change, and to contribute to a better future. Lear's story reminds us that doing the right thing is rarely easy. It requires courage to admit when we're wrong, to challenge the status quo, and to face the consequences of our actions. But it's in these moments of bravery that we find our true selves and help pave the way for others to follow. The fight for justice isn't something we undertake alone, it's a shared responsibility. Lear couldn't have succeeded without people like Judge Reynolds, Sergeant Thompson, and even Darnell Washington, who refused to let the system silence him. Together, they demonstrated that when individuals unite for a common purpose, real change becomes possible. Life has a way of presenting us with opportunities to reflect, to learn, and to grow. Lear's journey is a reminder that no matter how far we've strayed or how insurmountable the obstacles may seem, we can always choose a different path. The road to justice and integrity is long, but every step, no matter how small, brings us closer to the kind of world we all hope to live in, one where kindness, fairness, and truth are more than ideals, they're actions.